With the closure of the 3DS eShop, I've been thinking a lot about digital media lately and kind of how you're not really buying the actual media, you're just buying a license to use the media. Nintendo can take that away at any point in time. You know, they can close the shop, they can make it be impossible for you to re-download things that you bought years prior. You have to wonder if the same thing will happen with the Nintendo Switch. Will the things that we purchase on the Nintendo Switch eShop today be accessible 10, 15, 20 years from now on the future platforms? Will they be backwards compatible? And what we've seen with 3DS is it probably will not be the case. And while Sony kept up backwards compatibility features, from the PSP to the PS Vita, it didn't go beyond that. You're not able to play your old PSP games that you bought on PSN back in the day on your PlayStation 5. And honestly, I don't think there's a lot of people clamoring to do that. But my point is, will the digital media that you purchase today, is it worth investing in if down the road it's going to become inaccessible? And that, of course, makes a great case for physical media. And I oftentimes was very pro physical media until I've seen some of my older PlayStation 2 games ultimately come to their end where they aren't reading very well anymore. They've just became too old. And as time goes on, that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue for these older disc-based systems. So this got me thinking about what game consoles I own, what game collections I have that I really think will stand the test of time. I will be able to reasonably think that I'll be able to have a working copy of this console and accessible games on its media for years and years and years to come without really having any serious concern. And the PSP was the system that really stuck out to me as the one that I could see legitimately being around in my collection for a very long time. I took my UMDs, I backed them up onto my SD card, and I put them on my computer, and I have this collection of digital games that were once physical games. And obviously you can cut out that step and you can skip that step, but if you want to rip your own games, you want to have a physical collection as well. The PSP is one where you can very feasibly pull this off, and it's very easy to mod the system and be able to set this all up. Now, the other thing that I think sets the PSP apart and just how easy it is to repair the thing. I have had to do, various repairs on my PSP in the past. I did buy a very inexpensive one on eBay from Japan. If you don't own one, you want to pick one up, that's the best way to do it. Just go on eBay, find yourself a PSP from Japan, a Japanese model. You can convert the language. The language is all there if you want to get it in English, obviously. And then when you mod it, you can flip the X and the O, which is inverse on the Japanese models. I'd say it's really indecipherable at this point which one was my Japanese one and which one is my original American one that I had from when I was a kid. These systems, the repairs you have to do on them might be something like replacing a battery, which is trivially easy on this. And obviously, if you've had one of these since 2005 or you pick one up, and it's, we're talking these things are 10 plus years old. These batteries are shot. They're not holding anything of a charge. And even a replacement battery will only get you like 2 to 5 hours of charge time. That's why you want to be careful with what brand you buy. Definitely check out the Amazon reviews before you pick one up, because you might end up with one that only holds a couple hours of a charge right out of the box. But replacing these batteries are trivially easy. You pop off the back cap, you put in a new battery. It's like replacing a battery on a flip phone. They don't make things that are this easy to replace a battery anymore. Have you seen the battery replacements on smartphones? It's insane. So very easy to replace the battery. Other things you might have to repair, something like the joystick. That's pretty easy to do too when you pop the thing open, along with the screen, which if you're buying one of these used, you may be able to get a great deal on one that has a broken screen, and for 20 bucks or so you can replace the screen. It's a little bit more involved, but it's still something where if you just have a basic little screwdriver, you can get into this thing, you can replace the screen, and have yourself up and running. It's not, there's no soldering involved, there's no heat gun involved. This is not a complicated system to be able to repair, and best of all, because it was so popular back in the day, not as popular as the DS, but still very popular, there is a ton of different parts out there at very affordable prices to be able to just simply buy online. I think part of that is the PSP, like the PlayStation 2, has been very popular outside of the US, outside of Europe. Countries like Brazil are definitely still seeing a solid amount of use on this older handheld that I think has held up and aged remarkably well. I also think it's worth mentioning the memory and just the data of this thing. It's using a proprietary Memory Stick Pro Duo memory card, but that can be replaced with a simple plastic adapter that you can get on eBay or Amazon for less than a handful of dollars. You can pop a micro SD card in there, obviously, of piece of media, a micro SD card, something that's going to be around, I think, for a long time. We'll still be able to buy those as replacements. And then you can obviously transfer that into a computer very easily, back up those game files, add game files to it. It's not some sort of weird file structure where you're stuck, using FTP or some sort of proprietary client to get those files across. It's just simply done in a file explorer. You can do it on any version of Windows. You can do it on any operating system from now till like forever. This thing is built to last, and I think you couple that with the great library that the PSP has, and you could really spend years and years down the road playing this console. And that's just the proprietary PSP games. That's not even getting into the emulators that you can play on this thing, because this thing can emulate anything up to, even the Nintendo 64 in a shoddy fashion, but PlayStation 1 emulation in a very, very good fashion, as well as these older systems like the SNES, the Genesis, the Game Boy Advance. There's just so much that you can play on this handheld. But I think the other thing that even further steps the PSP up and steps it apart is PPSSPP, the PSP emulator for Android, as well as some other platforms. It has a RetroArch core, so you can use it on a ton of different things because of that. That's a very good emulation core, a very good standalone emulator, and because of that, you're able to play these games upscaled. They look better, they run better than they do on the original handheld. Something like the PSP that emulates very well on a whole wide range of Android devices is something that, again, will also be accessible for a very long time off into the future. If you have one Android device, totally burn out on you, so long as you got your save files and your games that you had on there backed up, you can just move them on to the next Android device. So while I totally understand the people that will say, oh, the PS Vita is a better system and it can play the PSP games and does so a little bit better, I will agree with them in that respect. But I think that long term, thinking 10, 20 years down the road, the PSP is the system that's going to have more legs because it's going to be more repairable, it's going to be more accessible, and there's just simply more of them out there for you to pick one up at a low price. And yeah, the price of the Vita has came down, but I would argue, would we look at the PS Vita the same way if it wasn't able to play PSP games? The PS Vita library is really good if you're into like JRPGs or just RPGs in general, but overall, for the typical Western gamer, I don't know if it has a ton of titles that really appeal to them. On the PSP, we saw a ton of titles get ported from the the PlayStation 2. They tried to shrink these games down the best they could onto a UMD, and we didn't see that much of that on the PS Vita beyond, maybe like the first 6 months where we're getting like full console ports of something like Madden, for instance. We didn't see much of that beyond, it's like, say, the first 6 months or a year. And then I feel like the PS Vita's ultimately third-party support obviously dried up, and I think that if it didn't have the PSP library and the PS1 library accessible on it, which are all playable on the PSP anyhow, I don't think people would look at the PS Vita in the same way. If you can get a PS Vita, or if you already have one, that's going to be the better device to play PSP games on. But I think that thinking long-term, repairability, accessibility as far as the platforms go, and being able to play these on other devices, the PSP is the library to have, and it's a very good, very deep library with 1,000+ games, and many of them I think are worth revisiting if you haven't. I mean, this is a system that I think only could have came out when it did. These games don't have any sort of microtransactions in. They don't have an over-reliance on online features, though some of them definitely had their fair share of online features that are, of course, now completely inaccessible. But these games came out at the tail end of a time period where you could have games with a ton of content that you unlocked through gameplay, which is something that I think people just yearn for today. And the PSP had a ton of that. Thank you guys for watching. I'm Bailey, and I will see you in the next video.